Six News Law and Government editor and the host of Between Parks Place and Capitol Hill, Stuart Jeffrey's with us. So, Stuart, looking at this victory for Antoinette Lattouf, obviously a really significant moment. This case has been going on more than a year since she was initially taken off air by the ABC, but she did win in the federal court. What was behind that decision?
Certainly. So there were definitely several reasons behind this unfair dismissal claim. There was also a racial discrimination claim that didn't see much support from the court. We did note that early on in its reasons, the ABC claimed that she had not proven that she was of Lebanese descent. And that argument got dropped, but it is quite embarrassing that they said you have to prove, Lebanese or Palestinian or Syrian descent to be able to claim racial discrimination. But that was largely out of the picture. The issue here was it being an unfair dismissal claim. Now, there are several issues. One of the issues, and it could even need to appeal definitely because there was definitely some grey areas in here. What's advice, what's directive is certainly one of the issues here. The court here held that it wasn't as enforceable as a directive would be. It was merely advice. Noting, of course, that she had received legal advice regarding it from ABC's own internal resources. So it's very much a grey area. So it's not super authoritative in that respect because it's a bit of a grey area as to what isn't advice and directive. I've definitely heard it argued that the court kind of smudged the difference there. Jeremy Gans, for example, on Twitter/X noted that there was a very narrow difference there. Another issue we had was, of course, the unfair dismissal, where the court held that it was a substantial part of the reason for the ABC's dismissal of her. Interestingly, in fact, the court held that even though the ABC wanted to maintain impartiality, that does not necessarily exclude Ms. Lattouf's political opinions from being a substantial and operative reason for the termination. So I think that's definitely one to look at. It suggests even that political beliefs would not inherently disqualify someone, which is interesting when you compare that with defamation proceedings against a news agent against any news company by readers, where the company could be liable as a result of the reporter's own actions. So it's an interesting balance there. I think in this case, it's balanced slightly in favor of the reporters, but that's definitely going to become a litigious issue going forward after this case.
And what about on that point about obviously the not posting political or partisan content, this real sticking point, as you mentioned, on advice versus directive, which was called out by the judge in the federal court yesterday. How did you kind of interpret that, and also what kind of maybe even precedent could we see in terms of future decisions about, are they really being told to do something, or is it just a mere suggestion?
Look, one thing we definitely do see is most journalists, including Six News employees like me and yourself, have in social media bios, for example, that our views do not represent the views of the news organization. That's definitely a point, and I think that's pretty across the board, pretty general, that any reporter with a social media presence should have that in their bios to try and help when it comes to defamation or anything brought against the news organization. That being said, definitely it does suggest again, it comes down to the difference between advice and directive, as you said. And I think part of it's going to come down really to, how enforceable is it? And that could change between advice and directive pretty easily. It's a question of, is a memo, for example, is a memo going around the office, is that advice or is that a directive? Does a lawyer reviewing it make it a advice or a directive? And I think going forward, that's going to be the very litigious issue. In fact, we could see an appeal based on that ground of what's an advice and what's a directive.
And what kind of costs are we going to see out of this result?
So the ABC has incurred around 1 million in legal fees. We don't have an exact fee for Lattouf, of course, here. Uh, the issue for the ABC here is that Lattouf made an offer for $85,000 and a settlement, and they rejected that offer. So in that case, we'll see a repeat of Pseudo and Deeming, where it is possible that the ABC will be forced to pay all of the legal fees of Ms. Lattouf rather than just ordinary costs because they refuse to get a settlement, which is quite often something you see in defamation cases and will be the case here for the ABC, which is unfortunate considering that that's around $1 million in taxpayer money. The ABC's record already tarnished, especially by relying on the proving race issue at the very start. And so this $1 million in legal fees, having to then also cover Lattouf's legal fees, is definitely a stain on the record for the ABC.